Okay, good morning, everybody. Today is Monday morning, and we are going to take a second attempt at our meeting for the Ad Hoc Arts and Cultural Committee. I'm sorry to everybody that joined us on Friday when we weren't able to get our WebEx issues figured out, so we apologize about that, but we're glad that we could get it together for this morning, so thanks everybody who has been patient with that. I'm going to go ahead and introduce first the committee and then the other staff members, including our new Arts and Cultural Commissioner. So we're excited about that. So I'm Julie Eisel, serving as Mayor Pro Tem at large and chair of the committee.
Ed Driggs, committee member.
Braxton Winston, committee member.
Malcolm Graham, committee member, and welcome to Charlotte. We really appreciate you from afar.
Tarek Bakari, committee member.
How about staff?
Tracy Dodson, assistant city manager.
Julia Martin, city manager's office.
I'll go. Priya Sarkar, city manager's office.
Great. Do we have anybody that I missed? Okay. With that, we're going to go ahead and just get started. This morning, we have two things that we want to cover this morning. The first, of course, is our presentation by our new commissioner. Priya, we're really excited that you're here, and we're going to give you that opportunity in a moment. And then the second will be council committee members will just have a brief discussion on what our next steps are with regards to the committee putting forth recommendations on our own guiding principles for this work. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Julia Martin first. Julia, did you have some words before I introduce Priya to speak?
Sure. Good morning, committee. So as you can see the agenda today, Priya will, specifically talk through some of the history about the Arts and Culture advisory board, and then some of her, considerations from her professional point of view, as having been involved in this work, and taking a look at some of best practices from a couple of other cities. And Priya joins us. I think this is her second week. And so she joins us from the Knight Foundation. We are very excited to have her in Charlotte. And I think she will be, on the 15th floor. So she'll have an office right down the hall from everyone else. And we're very excited to get working. So I'll turn it over to Priya.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and City Council members and everyone for your warm welcome. I'm so excited to be here and part of the City of Charlotte team. Julia, this is at the beginning of my third week, and so I have 2 whole weeks under my belt. But I'm excited because this is my first week here on the ground in Charlotte in person, and thrilled to be here. So thank you all for the opportunity to share some background that hopefully will help you to make your decisions in terms of the Arts and Culture Advisory Board appointments. So here, I just noting that as the Mayor Pro Tem and Julia mentioned, I'll share some best practices and examples to just inform your decision-making process. And among those are some ways that other grant-making bodies and other communities usually address potential conflicts of interest. And then we're seeking, working toward council nominations or your nominations on October 4th at the City Council meeting. Next slide, please. Perfect. Thank you. And if you could just go to the next slide. Thank you. So here we just wanted to include a brief recap of kind of the high level structure that was, I believe, discussed at your June meeting. So just kind of to have everyone on the same page before I share some additional information. So here you can see the structure of the board and the appointments. Everyone will serve a one 3-year term. You can see here a bit of the mix of folks who typically would be represented on a board, and we'll get more into that in a moment, and the mayor appoints the chair. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide, I wanted to share some overall functions and typically the responsibilities of some different entities. So here you'll see the advisory board, and in other cities and communities it can be called something different. Sometimes it's a commission, oftentimes it is a board or a council. So this is the entity that will guide the overall direction. This is more of a directional strategic guidance, of course, very, very important. And among the things that, of course, the advisory board will be helping to oversee the direction of is the upcoming cultural planning process and overall support of arts and culture in Charlotte. And they do approve and discuss funding allocations. And of course, they serve as ambassadors for arts and culture throughout Charlotte. So that is kind of, you can think of it as the highest level entity that we would be working with. And then it's quite common for the grant reviews to take place by separate panels or committees. So here you'll see on the right, these grant reviewers are typically recruited, by the community, or in our case, by the city staff, with input from that advisory board. And those are the folks who will review, score, and discuss proposals. And they will, score them based on criteria that we come up with together. Certainly the advisory board will be advising on, well, what are the criteria that are important, for the city of Charlotte? What are the goals that we have? What are the objectives that we have? And then we'll work in terms of the staff with that board to recommend and come up with a scoring criteria. Recruit, grant reviewers from the community. Sometimes folks will be, might be practitioners from elsewhere as well. Sometimes it's helpful to get kind of a nice mix of perspectives within particular artistic disciplines, but also with a local perspective. So there are different ways that different communities structure these. But the main thing here is that the actual scoring and discussion of proposals for grants is separate from the advisory board that oversees the overall direction. And then you have potential or optional advisory groups. And these can be called all kinds of different things depending on the community. But this is basically another way for folks who are knowledgeable and interested in and passionate about arts and culture to be involved. So just as an example, you might have an artist advisory committee or artist advisory group, and this could be artists and creatives who are, practitioners. They may not necessarily be with an organization, but they can, advise on, well, what is it like to be, a working, practicing artist or creative in Charlotte right now, and what are some insights that they could share to help the advisory board and the city staff to, to propose or develop activities to support their practice. And so here, just kind of offering up the different types of entities for you to consider as ways that people can be involved in helping shape the future of arts and culture. Next slide, please. So here, these are just some sort of, I would call these key principles or structural considerations to keep in mind in terms of what we usually see as best practice in various communities. So again, I think one of the keys is to have separate grant review panels doing that scoring and discussion of specific proposals. Another thing I wanted to mention is with the grant review panels, those do tend to change out. So for example, you could have panels change annually. You could even have different panels depending on the funding mechanism. So just making this up as an example for consideration, but let's just say there's a particular funding opportunity and it has to do with performing arts. Well, you might assemble a grant panel of folks who are very well versed in the performing arts. And then let's just say there's another funding opportunity. It might have to do with the visual arts or literary arts. Then you might assemble a panel that is very well versed in that. It doesn't have to be structured that way, but the nice thing about it is you can assemble panels that are particularly well suited to the type of funding you're offering. And it also allows for these panels' perspectives to evolve as the arts change in Charlotte, as time goes on or as different opportunities come up. So then the next piece is that conflict of interest piece. So it is pretty standard across communities for both the board members or board members, commission members, that overall guiding body to complete conflict of interest statements, and the panelists would do so as well. So the grant panel reviewers would complete those conflict of interest statements, and as well in discussion, the city staff who would be working with these bodies, we'd have those interest statements, conflict of interest statements in front of us, and also in discussion, we'd ask, does anyone have any other potential, conflicts of interest that they, should make the group aware of? Folks will do that at the beginning. And then during the discussions, certainly during grant conversations, if a panelist has an affiliation with an applicant that could be a potential conflict of interest, they would recuse themselves from the scoring and discussion. So they wouldn't even score the proposal. They wouldn't be in the room for the discussion. They would step out and come back in when the time was right, when that discussion was over. And so the last piece here is that the funding is based usually on an algorithm that matches the priorities of that particular community. So in this case, again, with the board's guidance, we would develop, what are the priorities for the city of Charlotte, especially for whether it's overall priorities and or particular priorities for a funding opportunity. And then the scoring would be devised, the scoring, I should say, design should be developed based on those priorities. And then there could be other priorities too. It might be that in addition to the scores that are yielded by that grant review process, there might be other things where the board is looking at, stated goals of the city of Charlotte. For example, inclusivity, equity, other types of things that we might be trying to do. And so based on these different parameters, then, a slate of awardees is usually proposed. And so then that guiding body, the advisory board, usually is the one that approves that slate, or if they have questions about the slate or concerns, they might want to say, hey, let's look at this slate and see, are we really reaching our goals for, equity or whatever the parameter might be, and there'd be discussion around it. But typically that guiding entity isn't doing the nitty gritty thumbs up, thumbs down on particular grants. It's looking at everything together holistically and, approving or discussing that. And so hopefully this is helpful just to kind of think about some of those key principles that underlie the functioning of the bodies that we talked about on the previous slide. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is just kind of a snapshot of what tends to make, an optimal profile of a board. So again, these are just more of the types of expertise and the types of representation that are important to have represented on the advisory board as a whole. So as you think about the 18-member board, you're looking for a mix of artists and creatives, arts and cultural organizations of all different types and sizes, and also of other folks who are not necessarily within arts and culture, but who are really well versed in arts and culture, for example, and also with the community. So here underneath, I've just listed a few different sort of sectors or realms or areas of expertise that you might have. The reason being, a lot of times, as you all probably know, there are other sectors and other types of work that intersect with arts and culture. I mean, in my experience, arts and culture touches pretty much everything. So here you could have folks who, are involved in education, and they're really, maybe they have had a long-standing partnership with various arts and cultural organizations. So they have a good read on what's happening in Charlotte in terms of that. Social service organizations, libraries, public spaces, all kinds of organizations, funding community. So that's kind of a mix of expertise. And then as you look at representation, of course, you do want to try to strive for the board as a whole, as you look across that board, to reflect as closely as possible the Charlotte community. So, fortunately, we have very recent census results that give us, a more up-to-date reading on, well, who's living in Charlotte? Where are they? Where are folks in terms of geography? It's always helpful to have a variety of ages, represented, cultural backgrounds, obviously. I've included tenure in Charlotte here as a consideration because Charlotte is a place where so many people are moving all the time. And so having kind of a variety of folks who might be newcomers to Charlotte, as well as longtime Charlotteans born and bred, having that mix also is helpful in terms of a range of perspectives. Next slide, please. So last thing I'll touch on before I'll stop for questions and discussion, just wanted to note here what we're believe are the next steps. So appointments to the, recommendations of nominees for the board coming up on the October 4th, and then hopefully approval the following week on the 10th. And then broadly speaking, I would anticipate that I would begin working with the board right away, hopefully, in October, and then in November, really starting to work on setting the stage for that cultural planning process with the board. Next slide, please. So thank you so much for allowing me to share that information, and we'll open it up for questions and discussion.
Great, thank you, Priya. I do see Mr. Winston has his hand up, and committee members, okay, Mr. Driggs, I can see if you do it on your computer, or Donato will let me know. Go ahead, Mr. Winston.
No, thank you. I just want to say thank you and welcome Priya to the team. For me, this was exactly what I think was needed in terms of guidance to help us think about this, the way you broke down the advisory board and how they might interact with a separate advisory group or grant review panel is something I think many of us are familiar with. It's something I sit on with the United Way, the Unite Here grant process. So that makes a lot of sense. So this was very helpful, and I hope colleagues feel the same way. It helps me feel a lot better about making my referrals, my nominations over these next couple of days. So hats off. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Braxton. Mr. Driggs?
Good morning. Priya, welcome to Charlotte. My name is Ed Driggs. I serve the southernmost district of the city. I had a couple of questions about what you explained to us. You should know I chair the Budget and Effectiveness Committee, which is our governance group. And I'm interested to know in a little more detail how the governance of the committee will work. What is the real authority? Does it take a majority vote by the advisory board to finalize a decision? Or are they really just advisory and you have executive authority? Is it like a strong mayor structure? So how will that work? Because I anticipate that there will be a lively discussion on some of the priorities and things. This is a topic that people are passionate about. So what is the final resolution on issues?
Councilmember Driggs, thank you for the welcome, and that is a great question. I don't know at this time what will be the final say. I anticipate that's something that we could determine and agree on together, potentially with the board, or perhaps that is a question for this group, to determine. But thank you for raising that. That is not something that I know the answer to at this time.
All right, we can talk more about that. You mentioned in one place the algorithm based on city priorities. Now, I think we know that the way this is organized, it's actually a joint venture between the city and private funders. So I think one of our key priorities as a suggestion needs to be to resolve with the private funders, our partners here, what the algorithm looks like so that we have consensus. I think it's fair to say that we have arrived at this new structure because there was a bit of a disconnect, frankly, and private funding was sort of drying up. So we're very excited that you're here and you can kind of bring more focus to the city funding and also bring the private partners in. but I will just mention to you that I think that they have their kind of goals for their funding, and we have ours. As we get further into the conversation, you will see that there are many different ways that different members of like us and them might choose to prioritize. So in the broadest terms, say we have the big box type of venues, and then we have the sort of grassroots. How's that going to work? Not questions that we will answer today, but I'm just saying I want us to get off on the right foot, I guess is what I'm saying. And some of these key questions about the governance, and since I'm a budget guy, the finance stuff too. As you go to allocate the money, you mentioned that there would be people reviewing grant applications. Are those going to be city staff members? Will they be people who report to you on city staff?
The grant panelists are typically folks who are coming from the community, so they would serve for a particular say funding mechanism. If let's just say there's an open call for submissions, and the grant panelists would review those and score them. I think as city staff, I would anticipate that I would also review these same applications. I would read them so that I'm familiar with what is being, applied for. But I don't anticipate I would be scoring them as city staff. I think it would be most likely that the reviewers would be doing the scoring. I would read them so that I'm familiar with, everything that has come in. These are things that we can certainly, do more study on and see how some different places do it and see exactly how we want to do it. But for me, I feel like in my role, I would want to be familiar with what applications have come in and be familiar with the content of those, even if I am not scoring those proposals.
While this is going on, I'll stop if others have questions and come back, because there are a few things I wanted to talk about. So, Madam Chair, maybe if you want to, I see Mr. McCarty's hand is up. I'll circle back and a couple other things I want to talk about. But again, welcome.
Thank you.
I think they're great questions, and so I think that is something that we really have to be very thoughtful about. Mr. McCarty?
Thank you. Welcome. I join everyone else in welcoming you, and we're excited to have you here. It's been a long time coming as we in this committee and in the broader council have worked to set the stage for this. So it is an exciting time. I just throw you a couple of things to start thinking about, and I think we'll all be working together from this point. We were very thoughtful about, one, designing certain aspects of this for certain reasons, but two, not getting too far ahead of you arriving here to have that stamp there. So it was a balance, and I think we did a pretty good job striking it. So now I think this is where you hitting the ground sprinting we can kind of answer some of these questions. In relation to the Board of Advisors, I think what we need right away is a bit of a charter that we establish. We can weigh in on a few things. One of the things that was very important in our conversations early on was, the strength of the role that you sit in. It definitely in the first couple of years, it was going to be something where, when building a startup, almost what this is, and looking at it to disrupt the old model, we needed to provide you with all the inputs and all the kinds of expertise you could have, but also then make sure we didn't, tie one hand behind your back. So you'll see a lot of the spirit in this design so far is very much of a strong mayor-like role, as Councilman Driggs just said, where you get the things, but the need for you to be able to succeed or fail on your own decisions and merits was so critical. So I think we need to really put together that charter of sorts, or whatever it is, that distinguishes the importance of the Board of Advisors, which we were very specific to call it a Board of Advisors, not a Board of Directors, and to show where those inputs are and how they occur, but also to distinguish the difference between your CEO style decisioning and that body. So I want to mention that, because I think the very next step, now that you're here and we're no longer worried about getting ahead of you, is that charter. I think will weigh in. I think secondly, there's going to be two bodies of work happen in parallel. What you'll be doing with your staff and team and everything like that in the community and setting that up. But this committee still has a mandate and a requirement that we need to circle back to, which is putting together those principles or edicts or whatever that mirror what our beliefs are as a city, not a micromanaging list, but the macro of, this is what we want our dollars ROI to ultimately impact. And it's going to have things to do with the large organizations in town, the small individual artists and small startup art and culture organizations, the facilities that we own, things of that nature, so that we can lay that out crisply and you can work to deliver on the ROIs in your plan there. So I know we've got to do that, which is going to be not a long, but an important body of work that we need to attack here. And then I think Ed's point on the private sector is another thing. And I think some of that's on us, right? We lay out macro strategy kind of vision items that we want to achieve outcomes on, and then you take those and bake it into your strategic plan. So I hope those things kind of make sense. Be glad to talk to you. I'm sure we're all going to have time to talk to you offline and things like that. But yeah, now's the time. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tarek. Mr. Graham, do you have any questions?
Yes, just a comment more than a question. Again, thank you again for being here. I think you're actually in Charlotte now, so.
I am. Thank you.
After a couple of days, you'll be a Charlotte team for real. So welcome to the city. I guess, everything you laid out makes really, really good sense to me. I do a lot of work with the Foundation for the Carolinas, and a different hat that I wear, not a city council hat, and the recusal process is really simple, easy, and makes sense, right? When something comes up in reference to an organization that I'm involved in, I'm simply not in the room, don't participate in the discussion at all, and don't know the outcome until it's released and published. So I'm very comfortable with that. I did want to kind of hear your thought, though, in reference to the performing arts, right? Concerts and facility management that may not like Spectrum Arena, where we may get shows and Broadway plays, etc. As you do your outreach and your vision for what that scope of work would look like, could you kind of share with me some of your thoughts about those things?
Sure. I want to make sure I understand your question first. When you say scope of work, do you mean with regard to planning around those things, or around the funding, like the grant making process related to that?
Both working with the organizations on the ground, the funding for those type of things, just kind of getting us away from what we have done over the years, right? We've been kind of married to this structure of the Arts and Science Council and the 3 or 4 major organizations that we fund and represent, as well as some minor ones. But I sense a need for change in how we deliver on arts and science in our community, working with grassroots artists, doing a lot more dealing with performing arts, production outside of the uptown area in terms of maybe in NODA, University City. How do you talk about those things in your planning and your execution?
Sure. Well, I have to admit that one of my first orders of business right now is learning about what are all those, venues and organizations, learning more about the structure. I have a little bit of familiarity, with what some of them are, but I know there's more that I'm getting up to speed on. And so what I anticipate is I'll be getting up to speed as quickly as possible on the the different venues, structures, sites where performing arts take place, as well as other types of artistic disciplines, and also learning more about how those have historically worked in terms of the funding and the operations. And as I am, meeting with folks who are involved in that, I think I'll start to get a clear sense of, their perspectives on what's been working, what do they think could be working differently. And for me, all of that, meaning the information gathering in terms of both how it's been working operationally, as well as listening to people's perspectives on, how it's been going, and if there are things that they think could be improved. All of that's part of the listening and engagement process that will inform the planning. So in this case, that's something where I think it's absolutely essential for me and for the advisory board to be taking in the information that's part of that listening and engagement process, that will then inform, well, what are opportunities? What do we want to keep doing that's working? What are opportunities to do some things differently or to improve in certain areas? And so that's one reason I think I'm eager to do that, both now, even before the formal cultural planning process starts, but also once we're in the cultural planning process, that kind of information gathering is going to be really critical.
Okay. Just a follow-up, Madam Chairman. Your relationship and your interaction moving forward with the Arts and Science Council, they have done, in my opinion, a lot of good work. They have a lot of good body of information that they have. So what's your interaction initially with that organization, and what type of value do you think they can add to the process?
Well, my interaction with the ASC has been, in my previous role with Knight Foundation, really as, meeting with folks on their team throughout my time in my previous role, to kind of learn about their work and kind of hear their perspectives from their experiences with supporting arts and culture in Charlotte, kind of learning whatever I could, especially as I was a newcomer to Knight Foundation, that could, help me and our Knight Foundation arts team think about, well, what is, how can we support arts and culture? What are other funders, in Charlotte doing? And then where is maybe the strategic sweet spot for Knight? And so in my previous role, I had met with, a couple of different, leaders of ASC, as well as other team members involved in various projects at ASC. And then, more recently, I, earlier this year, was, had the opportunity to participate in ASC's, one of their planning processes as they invited folks from the community to kind of give feedback on some of their strategic planning. And through that, I have gotten to meet ASC's current leader, Krista Terrell, in a meeting setting. So the other piece I would say, so for me, I see ASC as an organization that has a long history of being involved in arts and culture. And so, is going to be a key partner. And I have read the equity report that ASC released several months ago. And I think that information is really, important, an important input into the work that the advisory board and I will be doing.
Ed. Welcome to Charlotte.
Thank you.
Thanks, Malcolm. Braxton's got a question. Go ahead, Mr. Winston.
I just wanted to follow up to some of the points that Ed and Tarek said. One, I do think it could be a good thing if we took up a governance conversation in the budget and effectiveness committee. But I think we need to remind ourselves, right? The reason why getting this advisory committee is structured and us understanding about how this is going to work is that council after the appointment time is pretty much supposed to be hands off with the advisory portion of this process, right? It's kind of what we deal with is this council manager form of government. So ultimately, the city manager is going to make the final decisions, but created this executive level position, an expert that will be advising him and therefore us about the potential decisions and paradigms that will be implemented fiscal year to fiscal year, right? So it'll be very important for us as a council to really understand the type of guidance and priority setting, as Mr. Bakari said, that is set on a macro level, a high level, to give to the manager and the commissioner so that they can go and execute on those priorities year to year. So I don't see this kind of governance structure as being much different than anything that we do before. We just we have to think of it, I think, from a council perspective, at a much higher level in our guidance than we've given before as it relates to arts funding. But I think we just need to be clear about that. It's really important for us and our colleagues to have an understanding of why we're going to appoint certain people and how it's going to operate. But beyond that, we really need to be hands off that process once we get through it. Thank you.
Thanks, Paxton. Back to Mr. Driggs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think a couple of us have alluded in different ways to the same thing. We as council members do have accountability to the public for decisions we make about the use of taxpayer funds. So I think our goal is to create a broad framework, but not interfere too much with specific decisions or let things get political or whatever. We want the arts community to kind of have latitude to run itself. So, if you think of the fire department, for example, we don't kind of tell the fire department how to fight fires, but we do make decisions about compensation and total funding. And that's why I think, to Mr. Bakari's point, it is important that we kind of get the rules of the road established. So we'll work on that, though. And Priya, you're in your first couple of weeks. We're just kind of trying to get you up to speed on the sort of conversations that we're having and the thoughts that we have and the things that we'll want to tackle. My question for you is this whole process is actually aimed at creating an arts and culture plan. So what we're envisioning here is that over a certain period of time, we will have a broad policy kind of statement, and we will have a framework in which we can continue to fund the arts without having to invent things or answer all these questions. Do you have an idea of how much time it takes to create a plan like that? Do you have any thoughts about what it will look like? Just interested in very general terms.
Certainly. This is one of my favorite topics. So generally speaking, and I'm going to in terms of time frame, I'll focus on the actual planning process because part of what I'm learning from my colleagues at the city is, sort of the prep work, how long that will take. So I'll speak from the point that I am more familiar with. So once a planning process is launched, in my experience, that could take, depending on the community and how quickly it goes, I would say 9 months to a year. The reason for that is, and it varies based on community, but I would say for Charlotte size, which is a larger city, and with, of course, the stated objective of making sure it's an inclusive planning process. So that means really doing thorough community engagement throughout Charlotte. That's, typically the part that, takes time to do well, to do properly. And so, again, some of that depends on just what's going on in Charlotte, at the time that we launch, and kind of what is the methodology, how extensive is it, how long does that take? But then you get into strategy development after the broadest portion of the engagement and the research. It involves qualitative and quantitative research typically. And then the last piece, which I think is really critical in terms of what it looks like, is a useful tool will require a detailed kind of roadmap or implementation plan for how to execute on the strategy. So, I think there are different examples out there of cultural plans, and some are kind of more high level at that strategic framework level, and others have that detailed roadmap where it will outline, different tasks and time, anticipated timelines for accomplishing those, who owns different tasks, who are potential partners for those, and even, estimates of cost ranges for particular activities. To me, those types of documents are the most useful tools, because those are things that anyone in the community can really just have on their desk, and hopefully, again, should be a living, breathing, adaptable document. But I would think, mine will be dog-eared, marked up, highlighted, and it's something that you really want to use. But you can only do that when you have some detail. And again, you revisit it and you change it. But I envision, what I'd want at the end of a planning process is something as detailed as that, but that we check back in with, fairly often to see how we're doing and what might need to change. Does that help? Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Where have the biggest successes been? What do you regard as best practices? What investments have other cities made that, were especially successful?
Sure. I'll mention a couple that I'm just kind of a little more close to. One is several years ago, the city of Chicago did a cultural plan, and I forget at this moment which year it was launched. But what I recall is that was an unusually fast cultural planning process, just because it was the then mayor's goal to have it done by a certain time. I wouldn't recommend a really, really fast process because it's very stressful on everybody, including the community. But it still managed to be very thorough. And what I recall was very notable about that one is, they did a really wonderful online dashboard where folks in the community, and this has now been kind of emulated by other cities as well, but they did an online dashboard where anyone in the community, you're an artist, you're kind of just someone who takes dance classes, or you are with an organization, or you're with a partner, a funder, you can self-report progress on something that was in the plan, meaning you had an activity that related to this piece of the plan, and you could go on there and you could self-report. And that was a way that they could really track how they were doing on various tasks. By the end of year one, they had executed on 60% of the plan already. It was phenomenal. Now, that's not a pace that you necessarily keep going with year after year, but it just showed how they really kept that momentum going from the planning process, and then used a tool to have people throughout Chicago report on what they were doing, and were able to see that they were actually putting into practice 60% of the things in the plan, which I just remember was a really exciting, metric. Another city that has more recently been implementing their plan is the city of Dallas. And that plan was launched in, almost exactly 3 years ago. So it was launched in fall of 2018. And they are, still, moving forward on those. I had an opportunity to catch up with the director of Dallas's Office of Cultural Affairs just last week, or maybe the week before. She shared the presentation, that she was going to be making to City Council on how they're, executing on the plan. So it was great to see that, there in that case here, it's been, 3 years, and they're still using the plan priorities and strategies, and checking back in with them and reporting. They're evaluating their progress, and they're still reporting to City Council on how they're doing. So they're finding it to still be a useful tool. So I'll stop there maybe now, and I'm happy to talk about more things, in other communities and observations anytime.
There is a lot more to talk about. I think our initial challenge in the broadest terms, and this isn't a question, it's just an observation, is defining success. Like, what are we trying to achieve exactly? And just to give you an idea, we want to have a vibrant and diverse grassroots arts community, because we think that makes for a happier city. And at the same time, in terms of economic development and things like that, having the cultural venues, the big box venues, is important. So I think a lot of what you'll be doing and what we will all be doing is just resolving. If we take this amount of money that we have, the $12 or the $18 million, and we'll get down to specifics about how do we establish secure funding for the major venues, and what types of grassroots arts do we want to support, not necessarily everybody on a street corner with a chalk, but, so I think that's the work that lies ahead. But I appreciate this conversation. I think you're very qualified to lead us in that effort. And again, welcome to Charlotte.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Priya, I'll just say, like my colleagues, we really are excited that you're here, and we're very anxious to dig into this work, and we very much need your guidance on this. I think, to Mr. Driggs' point, our most immediate challenge, that to me is our nominations for, well, it's twofold. One, our nominations for this advisory board, and you pointed out some categories that certainly have me rethinking the 6 positions that I have the ability to make nominations for. And so I think one of the charges of the committee and of my colleagues who are on this morning is that we need to give the rest of our colleagues some feedback on that with regards to, have we selected people that might represent libraries or parks? I mean, I think that's a great recommendation, social services and education. So I know that we had a slate of nominees that were unbelievable. And our biggest problem, and I know everybody feels this way, is narrowing it to 6 people from from what we're able to do. So I do think that in this next week, we all need to be talking to each other about that, because it'll take 6 votes to, well, not necessarily. I think, on October 4th, we have an opportunity to at least narrow it down. Anybody with 1 vote or 2 votes will move forward. So that to me is the biggest challenge. But I want to make sure that we as a committee are clear this morning on what we're recommending. You have said that people can recuse themselves from either the advisory board or a grant panel. And now the grant panel, I'm not so worried about, because right now it's the advisory board that we have to select. So I guess the question is really for my committee colleagues as to what we are recommending should be the criteria for selection. That's what we got hung up with 2 weeks ago. And from what I'm hearing is it's okay to recuse yourself. However, the big question that we had is it okay to select somebody who individually could get remuneration in the form of salary, some kind of compensation? I personally don't feel good about that. I don't know that we should do that. It does, but as you pointed out, that doesn't mean that those individuals don't have an opportunity to participate, because we can establish separate advisory boards. We'll call them something different so that we're not confusing it, but it's sort of affinity groups, if you will, that have that opportunity to provide feedback. Some of those folks might not want to serve for 3 years. This is a big commitment, but I'd like to get a recommendation from the committee officially to the rest of the council. If you believe that we should exclude people who would have direct remuneration from this process, and B, can volunteer board members of other organizations be eligible to be selected? I'll just start it off that I would feel strongly that somebody who we appoint does not get direct remuneration, and we do allow board members of any nonprofit, as long as they're a volunteer, to be a candidate. And how do the rest of you feel about that? I'd make that as a suggestion. If anybody wants to second that or whatever, that's up to you.
So, Madam Chair, I think we need to be guided by the principles that apply to us. And I agree with you that remuneration, if you own a business or something like that, you can't be a council member. And then when it comes to board members or where there's no financial interest, the recusal process does provide a means of avoiding a conflict on a case-to-case basis. The concern I have is just that if you had a board member of one arts organization who was a member of this advisory board, other arts organizations competing for funding might think that constituted an unfair advantage, even if it didn't come down to a specific grant or something. So the board member might advocate strongly for dance or for one of the arts. And then the symphony might say, well, music is important too. So I do think it's tricky. We're not going to come up with a completely clean answer, but I think the idea that you can't have a financial interest and be on the board, you can't be a potential grant recipient, or you can't be an individual who would stand to gain financially from the awarding of a grant and be on this board makes good sense. And after that, I think it will be tough to legislate, frankly, on exactly what constitutes unacceptable bias or engagement. And so the main thing is that you can't have a personal financial interest in the activity of the board, and that you will recuse yourself when topics come up in which you are conflicted by virtue of your affiliations. I think that's broadly consistent with what you were saying, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm not sure we're on the same page about the board members, because I feel like you could have a board member and they could recuse themselves. But I'm open to hearing what everybody else thinks, and Priya, how you think we would handle that.
I don't have a big problem with what you've said there. I don't think. I think a lot of my concern is handled as long as this charter I was mentioning is properly constructed that says these are truly board of advisors. If we were talking about a board of directors that 51% or something like that had to approve certain strategic things that we know Priya and this as the commissioner is kind of the strong mayor, the CEO of, that would be a different story. So, I think there's a bigger question before this one, which is how are we going to appoint or nominate anyone when we don't have our priorities from that key strategic vision level laid out? I mean, that's like trying to field a professional sports team without knowing the sport you're going to play first. So I think we need to quickly get that done. Priya and team need to quickly get the charter done so we know the exact scoping of the board of advisors and how that will work. And we need to get our principles and our vision elements together alongside the private sector so we know what players we're trying to field, because there may be a huge element of financial coaching and business support that the arts and culture community, we very well know they need. And we might need folks that are experts in that or experts in facilities that we own or whatever, right? So I just don't know how we're going to go about nominating folks, let alone deciding what the best conflict of interest approach is until we have those two things that really lay the path out for it. I don't think I have a problem with it. I just feel like we're just basically saying, well, I like this person, they should be there, not is it the right mix that's being added to the team.
I agree with that, but it's kind of a chicken and an egg problem too. But that's kind of the point I was trying to make before about governance and some of these key questions, because an advisory board is one thing. We are kind of effectively, to use the analogy, we're the stockholders. We and the private funders are the shareholders. And so we don't run the company and so on, but we're interested in the company's success. And we need to choose how we want to invest, what we're investing in. And so I think there is some work that needs to be done on our level to kind of justify our use of public funds. The private funders will have similar concerns. They have to justify their use of funds. And it's a bit circular. Like we're now saying we're going to choose people who will tell us. But those people need to have instruction from us of a kind. They need to be acting. We were talking about, Priya, you were talking about an algorithm. I think there needs to be a framework in which all of this occurs that is created by us at the inception. And Mr. Bakari, I agree with you that that framework is what will have a big influence on who the appropriate people are.
Okay. I hear what you're saying. So that would indicate really that we would not be ready to make nominations on October 4th, and that instead this committee needs to establish what our guiding principles are before we can do that. Is that what you're saying? And Priya, do you believe that that's the right order of things?
That's a tough question.
I appreciate this. Yeah, I appreciate the conversation. Here's what I am hearing, I think, and thinking. It sounds like what the next steps could be are that this committee could. So you'll just bear with me, I hope, for a moment, because I think what I'm doing now is a mix of reflecting back what I'm hearing and offering some of that suggestion that that some of you mentioned, my giving in this role. The committee could together develop, as you said, Mayor Pro Tem, guiding principles. And I think that sounds to me like the appropriate high level of guidance that the committee would give. And And potentially at the same time, I could work to and do. I would base this looking at some other kind of charters or sort of structures, governance, kind of processes, and potentially could bring forth a proposed sort of governance model, we could say, for the committee's consideration. So, and then perhaps the committee could, look at the guiding principles and the proposed governance model and approve those. And perhaps that would give the level of structure that, the committee is seeking before then making nominations to the board. The piece that doesn't take into account, I realize, is the private sector portion. As you mentioned, Councilmember Driggs, as you noted, that it's a partnership, and so that kind of governance model would need to be something that both public and private, entities are comfortable with. But I wonder if that seems like a feasible way to move forward.
Priya, I think, and Madam Chair, I think it would make great sense for us to meet with the private funders. I've said this to the manager over the past month. We need to achieve some sort of unity about, let's call it our goals, whatever you want to but why are we putting this money in? What are we hoping to get out of it? What is our purpose with this? And so we don't dive too deep into what we're asking Priya to do, but she has to have some kind of direction from us. And we need to be in agreement with the other funders. There's no point in having two camps here with competing priorities. So if we could pull together a statement of, again, the goals, why are we doing this? How do we define success? And put that down as the first level of charting a course. And then, Priya, you would have a better understanding so you don't later find out, oh, well, that's not what they wanted. Or, start hearing people saying, why did you do that? That kind of thing. I think there's a burden on us to give you a clear mission. And it's not just as broad as create an arts and culture plan, because the truth is that we have a stake in what that plan is. And even though we don't want to be involved in picking the winners and losers or allocating the money or whatever, we do have a responsibility as council to explain how we're going about this and the investment that we're making, again, of the taxpayers' money. So I don't know whether it's practical to suggest that we get together with Marsicano or Bowman and or whomever, I don't know who others are that speak for the private funders, and try to have a meeting of minds at that very high preliminary level before we move on to some of the things that Mr. Vicari talked about and Mr. Graham on, what we don't have on council is the sector expertise. So we know that we want certain things for our city as council. We want to have a happy arts community. We want to be perceived as a place that has a vibrant scene in the arts and that has venues that are similar to those of other big cities that will be attractive to people who might be deciding to live here or companies that might be deciding to locate here. I mean, we can state in very general terms why it is that we're investing any money, frankly, in the arts. And there are tangible reasons and there are qualitative reasons, aesthetic reasons, if you will. But I think to send you off, to just sort of appoint these people and then send you off and say, okay, you do this, invites subsequent conversations about, well, wait a minute, that's not actually what we had in mind. So,
yeah.
To answer your question, Madam Chair, are we ready?
Yeah, to me, it's a question of sequence, right? Because I personally believe we could go ahead and make our nominations. This is 1/3 of the board. Um, we've got an incredible selection of people that fit some of the criteria that Pri was talking about. But what we haven't done is we haven't set out our sort of mission statement as a board, as a council. I think that it's worth it to look at some of the mission statements of other cities, and I have done that just to get the proper wording. Every city is going to be a little bit different, especially depending on whether you're a city that owns a lot of the buildings like we are, and I think Dallas is like that, Boston is not, so their mission statement's a little different. But that's a big deal, the fact that we do own a number of these buildings that house our cultural organizations. And so I personally would like a dual process of this committee establishing our mission statement for the city, because it could be very different than what our private funders want, and that's okay. It doesn't mean it will establish the rules of the game. It just is saying we as a council, as the public sector representing the community, this is the public, this is what our mission statement is. And so we'll get going on working on that as a committee. I would ask that if all committee members would send me your thoughts on that, on what that mission statement is, and we can work with Julia and Priya to make some proposals on that. We'll also ask colleagues. But the real question is, are we in a position right now to make our 6 nominations? I don't know that the mission statement is really going to change who I'd like to select. For me, it's a bigger question of how do I narrow it down to 6. So, what I'd like is a recommendation this morning from this committee. Do we move forward and make our nominations on October 4th, or do we not?
Priya, have you seen the nominations? Do you know who the people are we're talking about in the pool?
And then
I have not.
Point after you do, Ed.
I have not seen them.
I mean, I'd be interested to hear your views. But Madam Chair, I'm a little concerned about just the shortlist process. We've got a lot of qualified people, and it could be that process of narrowing down is informed by the mission statement.
Okay, Malcolm, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I don't think I think we ought to keep it simple, right? And not try to make this thing more complicated than it really needs to. And I don't see why we couldn't move forward with the nominations, notwithstanding the fact that we don't have a mission statement. I think we all know where we're trying to go to, right? And the people in our community that have signed up for it, ultimately it's a council decision. So I'm not sure why we would need to wait. And I just hope that along the way that we really try to keep this thing simple and not try to overthink it.
Tara, what would you say? Do we move forward with our nominations while we're working on our mission statement, or do we wait?
I mean, I think we can do that if we all commit to getting it done quickly, right? I don't want to hold us up at all, but even in your own example, there's a ton of qualified folks. How do we get down to 6? This may very well be the exercise that tells us how we get down to 6. And I mean, while we generally know where we want to go, like as Mr. Driggs said earlier, we're not going to micromanage this process any more than we tell the fire department how to fight a fire. So our major strategic input is on the front end. And I mean, how we define what our 5, 6, 7 high-level vision statements that we have to measure what success as an outcome will look like is literally everything that then we will go and define who sits on that board of advisors to champion those things. And in fact, that's kind of the thing. You say, I'm selecting you because of number 5, right? And that way that person goes in there understanding why they were selected, if they were indeed selected for something like that. So like our biggest thing was in the manager selecting Priya. And then our second biggest thing is defining these and what our 6 appointments end up being. So I'm not opposed to supporting that you'd like to get some movement out and in the things you said today. But if we're going to do that, I think that at a bare minimum in parallel, like it shouldn't take that long and we should be able to put this stuff together. Do we need to have a huge meeting with the private sector and things? It'd be nice, but that'll probably slow it down. We can get there through time. But I think the critical path is writing these things down and analyzing them, because one of them might be connecting to economic development and that department in the city, right? From a recruiting perspective, from a job growth perspective. So we would want to place somebody in there who's got that level of expertise. So I think we can do it in parallel, and I'm prepared to support moving forward. But that means that like we're going to need to get like pretty serious pretty quickly about how we get that done. I think this committee's set up to do that work.
Okay, so that really, and I'm on board with that. I'm like Malcolm. I think we could, but really, there's no pressing reason to rush it. So I would say that at this point, in Braxton, I don't think is we hold off on our nominations next week, and we immediately begin to discuss the formation of our mission statement. And I think colleagues, if you would put some thoughts together and forward those to me, I'll work with Julia and Priya on a draft of what we might consider in our next meeting. And I will let other colleagues know as well so that they can give us some feedback. And I think, Julia, can you or Priya, could you just send us some examples of other cities, if they have a mission statement, or, I mean, I know Dallas had one up front in their culture vision plan. And I think I read maybe Cleveland's, or there's a couple out there that I read and I thought those were really good. I'm not trying to copy theirs, but I think it would help us to try to put this together quickly. And then we will schedule another meeting fairly soon to agree on that, and then reschedule the time that we'd have our nominations.
Mayor Pro Tem, sorry.
So I'm sorry, Chris. So this is a decision that the committee is going to make, not the council. I'm just logically stepping it out, right? Will it need council approval?
Well, I think the mission statement is on behalf of the council, and so I think we would end up making our recommendation to the full council to accept our mission statement.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah, absolutely. That's got to be a full council decision.
I would want it published when this cultural vision plan comes out in writing. I would want it published in the front that that this council makes these has agreed on this mission statement. And we know, because this committee really didn't have a lot of disagreement when we started this process, that we really want to see a different way of funding our arts community and providing opportunities to our arts community. We were very on board with that. A lot of our colleagues agreed with that, but maybe didn't know why we all felt this way. And because we are the group that has done the most work on this. So I think that filling everybody in as we go along, getting their ideas is going to help us structure that statement. But I think it's really critical that we have that. We can then meet with the other funders or whatnot, but we have to be very certain about why we're doing this and put that into words. And then you're right, we can then use that to guide our nomination process. So if there's any other comments, please go ahead. But we've got just a few minutes left.
Mayor Pro Tem, may I quickly just make an observation and a suggestion that could be helpful to the group? So typically the cultural plans, that we've probably, we've seen and looked at as examples. the vision statements or that those include, they're typically developed during the planning process. So those are usually developed by the steering committee. And typically with input from that extensive community engagement, because they're essentially a shared vision of the community, and then that is usually published as kind of that top line vision. What I wonder, and so I guess what I would suggest is, whatever is crafted by this committee at this stage, I agree. It would be really helpful to have something that's high level that then both the advisory board and I can use, as a guiding, kind of statement to go forward. And at the same time, just kind of hopefully having that flexibility to allow for that community engaged cultural planning process to yield the shared vision and priorities that then usually is what comes out in the plan. And then the plan becomes the guiding document for the advisory board and for myself, for the city staff.
We're not talking about a mission statement as such. We need to be clear about why we're doing this as council. Mm-hmm. So we have a responsibility to commit the funds with a rationale. So all we're really talking about is why we're doing this. And that is something that needs to be resolved by us. And you need to understand every year in our budget process, that money needs to be reappropriated. So the subsequent council, does have the authority. So we need to create, for the benefit of our successors and as a standard of accountability, just a rationale for what we're doing right now, for your role, and the way that we, as the sort of the creators of this company, and the intention would not be at all to limit, but in a certain sense, we have to limit because we have a responsibility. So I think all we're talking about here is sort of a statement of our goals or our rationale for the investment, and we've actually looked at some of this already. It says arts are important for the community, arts are important for economic development. So the outcome, the type of outcome we would like to achieve in very general terms is such and such. And I think that could be sufficient to have an influence on how we choose among all of the qualified people, for example, we think ought to be on the advisory thing. It would also send a message to our private partners that they can react to. Because we do need to have, they may have their priorities, we may have ours, they may not be mutually exclusive, but we have to harmonize at least what we want to do and what they want to do. So I think just jumping into this without having something written down, a little contract with the private guys and a little kind of instruction book, like a mandate for you. So we're not going to kind of preempt or get too far down the road in terms of the work that we're asking you to do. But I just think there is a critical first step at the inception. I mean, Mr. Bakari was talking about a charter. And I want to talk to the manager a little bit about this as well, again, in my governance committee capacity. But I think we can work it out, but I believe that what the Mayor Pro Tem is suggesting, the chair is suggesting, is a valuable step. And we'll be in touch with you the whole time and not get ahead of ourselves.
And I think I threw a wrench in it by saying mission statement. So I hear what you're saying, Priya, and Ed, I hear what you're saying, and I think it's wording, right? So let's stick with saying council is going to develop our guiding principles. And, there could be an overall mission statement at the end of this process, but let's stick to guiding principles. And that is really our next step. So I'll go ahead and work with staff to get another committee meeting set up. In the meantime, let's start talking about it. Let's start sharing ideas and put together something that we can hopefully approve next time we meet. Is that, I see that Ed is nodding. Oh, yeah.
Can I one thing? So if you remember, in February, the Arts and Culture Committee wrote a letter setting out some of their guiding principles and kind of laying out the process even prior to what happened in the budget with the money and all of that kind of stuff. And so I think that might be a good kind of foundational document for all of you to think about and go back to as, you know, the impetus for originally starting down this path. It lays out some things like incentivize opportunities for growth and support the industry ecosystem and things like that. And so that could just be a good starting ground, and I'm happy to send that out.
Yeah, that's great, Julia. If you could send that out, Priya, if you could take a look at it and just get an idea of what we were thinking, and then let's use that as our basis for next time. And colleagues, committee members, if you would let's share our thoughts on that.
I think the best way to Priya to visualize what we're talking about again is this is the thing where each budget cycle you would probably come back to us and give a presentation on how you felt the organization, the funding, the impacts, the board, everyone met those things. And then we judge and say, okay, this is on track. Therefore, let's allocate the same amount next year and going forward. So it isn't, to Ed and there's point, won't belabor that. It's not a vision. Like, you'll still craft all the things that do all of that. This is our one narrow kind of return on impact, return on investment. How are we measuring what we view as success as stakeholders for those dollars?
Okay. All right, good. I think we're on board with that. And we'll keep it moving, but Julia, go ahead and send that to us, and we'll work with that from there. And if we don't have anything else this morning, we'll go ahead and wrap up.
We're going to get a couple of other sample vision statements as well, or some documents that other cities have created for our reference.
I think Dallas called them pillars or whatever. We can have our own pillars, but that's just our, the city councils, and then develop them further. Make it clear that the process will encompass a full community set of priorities that will develop the mission statement.
So I'd like to move to adjourn, Madam Chair.
Okay, do I have a second? No second to adjourn.
Second.
Thanks. All right, thanks everybody. Thanks, Priya and Julia. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Baker, for being on as well.